how you doing, guys? It's Uncle J here. I can be talking to you about anything in the world, but today I'm going to be doing a recap on UFC 136. Then I'm going to give my predictions on UFC 137. Yeah? So let's begin. UFC 136. I'm just going to talk about the three fights that interested me. The first fight is Brian Stann versus Cerrone. Looking at the fighters going into the fight, you had Brian Stann, who was average in all areas. I mean, his stand-up is alright. If I think, I'll give it like 7 out of 10. And everything else, I'll probably give out 6 out of 10. Then you have Cerrone, who again, his striking, I'll probably give it like 8 out of 10. And his wrestling / grappling, I'll give it 10 out of 10. But the factors that you had to take into consideration was that Cerrone had been out for like a year. So it's one of those things that you're wondering, and Brian Stann had been quite active. So even though Cerrone is the fighter that on a higher level, is a higher caliber fighter, but he's been inactive, whereas Brian Stann is like an average fighter, but he had been very active. So you had to take that into consideration. So, I mean, looking back at my predictions, I did pick Cerrone, but I was concerned for him. But when going into the fight, it was as if Cerrone had never left. He had never left the octagon. He looked sharp. He had his normal, awkward, irritating style, and Brian Stann just didn't have the wrestling or jiu-jitsu to deal with it, and ended up losing via submission. And Cerrone, and it's funny that Anderson Silva was at ringside watching, because, you know, in the rematch, we're going to know whether Anderson Silva was lying about his ribs, or whether Cerrone was just too much for him. But that's for another prediction video. The next fight, Jose Aldo versus Kenny Florian. Now, for me, this fight... Okay, let's talk about fighters first. Jose Aldo, black belt in jiu-jitsu, dynamic striker. Kenny Florian, black belt in jiu-jitsu, technical fighter. Jose Aldo, more aggressive. Kenny Florian, more of a counter fighter and picks his shots. In this fight, Kenny Florian showed a lot of wrestling, and which gave Jose Aldo a lot of problems. I don't know what the judges were looking at and what the commentators were looking at, but for me, Kenny Florian clearly won that fight. He won rounds 1, 2, and 4. Jose Aldo won rounds 3 and 5. So, but what was annoying me was that, you know, Jose Aldo was putting up his hands after the fight, and Kenny Florian was putting his head down like he lost the fight, when he clearly won round 1, 2, and 5. So in my eyes, Kenny Florian, if you're watching this, you are the featherweight champion. Put your head up. Alright, the main event. Frankie Edgar versus Gray Maynard. Very good fight. Very good fight. Once again, you know, Gray Maynard was roughing Frankie Edgar up, having his way with him in the first round. Like in the fight in January, Frankie Edgar was coming back using his speed, his movement, and obviously his wrestling as well. And then in the fourth round, like at this level, Gray Maynard just had one mistake and it was all over. Basically, while they were clinching / striking, Gray Maynard trips, and Frankie Edgar capitalizes on the opportunity and just, you know, technically knocks him out. TKO. So what happens now? I think Frankie Edgar should fight. He'll probably end up fighting the winner between Clay Guida and... Who's Clay Guida fighting? Clay Guida and Ben Henderson, which will be a really good fight. But again, I'm not going to say who I think I will fight. That's for another video. Alright. While I'm here, I might as well give my predictions on UFC 137. First fight I'm going to look at is Dennis Silva versus Donald Cowboy Cerrone. Dennis Silva, very good kickboxer, His spinning back kick is deadly, and he's very good at actually just unleashing it when you least expect. His ground game, he has good takedown defense, but his actual grappling is somewhat questionable. Donald Cerrone is one of those all-round fighters. He can wrestle, he can submit, and he can kickbox. But his kickboxing is like top level, top notch. For this fight, I have to give the edge to Donald Cerrone because one, he's more well-rounded than Dennis Silva, and I think he has more of a killer instinct than Dennis Silva. However, if you are a Cerrone fan, you have to be concerned because Dennis Silva is so tough that even though Cerrone basically is one of those fighters that Cerrone could be beating him up for 4 rounds and Dennis Silva could just connect in the last 5 seconds and win. So Cerrone should win, but it's a dangerous fight for him. Crow Cup versus Roy Nelson. This is a very interesting fight. You know, Crow hasn't been looking good in his last 3 fights. But having said that, even though he's got knocked out in all those fights, he still looked pretty dangerous before getting knocked out. You know, if you get my drift. Ryan Nelson is a very, 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 very talented fighter, but he just doesn't work hard. And I'm not just saying that because he's fat. I'm not just saying that because he's fat. I'm saying it because I've noticed in the 2 fights that he lost, the fight he lost against Frank Mir and the fight that he lost about Dos Santos, something that I've realized about Roy Nelson is that he doesn't change. So if what he's doing isn't working, he keeps doing the same thing over and over. And that is my concern with Roy Nelson going into this fight. I feel Roy Nelson should win this, but if Crow should somehow have an answer for what he does, Roy Nelson isn't going to adapt. So I am putting I predict Roy Nelson will win by knockout or submission, but I have a lot of doubts, but I'm going with Roy Nelson. Okay. Co-main event, Nick Diaz versus BJ the Prodigy Penn. This is a very, very, very interesting fight because both of them are identical in terms of the skills that they embrace. Both of them are really good boxers. Both of them are really, really good jiu-jitsu practitioners. Obviously, physically, Diaz has advantage in terms of reach because he's a lot longer than BJ Penn. But BJ Penn has begun to incorporate wrestling into his game. Obviously, he's not going to be like GSP or Chael Sonnen, but he is. I mean, if you look at John Fitch, who is a very, very good wrestler, BJ Penn gave him a lot of problems in terms of taking him down. I know it was a bit of a shock, but it shows that the wrestling is beginning to be embedded into his fight's DNA, if you get my drift. So that gives him the edge in that. So even though Diaz can submit you on the ground, BJ Penn can take you to the ground now and submit you. But I'm gonna have to give this fight to Nick Diaz simply because Nick Diaz he just has that killer instinct that I think he has more of a killer instinct than BJ Penn, and I think that killer instinct will make the difference in the fight. I think Nick Diaz is willing to go to places that BJ Penn isn't willing to go, and I think because of that, I think Nick Diaz will become victorious and end up fighting the winner of Carlos Condit versus GSP. Which brings us to the main event, which is George St Pierre versus Carlos Condit. This is a really, really, really interesting fight. George St Pierre, we all know George St Pierre. Excellent wrestling, excellent jiu-jitsu, excellent stand-up. And the stand-up, he has 2 tiers. So he has his boxing and he has his karate, where he comes from. Carlos Condit is really, really a really, really good stand-up artist. He's really good. He has really good grappling in terms of jiu-jitsu, and he's very good in the clinch. He's not like a straight-up wrestler like Chael Sonnen or rush in and go for a double leg, but he's more in the judo area where he get you in a clinch and take you down from there. George St Pierre has the edge in wrestling, no doubt. No one will argue about that. Jiu-jitsu, I'll have to give it to George St Pierre because I think Carlos Condit is more MMA jiu-jitsu rather than pure jiu-jitsu, while George St Pierre has good wrestling and he's a black belt in jiu-jitsu. Striking, I have to say they're pretty even because George St Pierre has his karate and he has his boxing. Carlos Condit obviously has a background in kung fu, Muay Thai and kickboxing, so they're pretty even. Killer instinct, I would have to give it to Carlos Condit because they don't call him the natural born killer for nothing. He's very good at finishing his opponents, which is what makes him extremely dangerous for George St Pierre because, again, George St Pierre can control him, but Carlos Condit can end the fight at any time. So I would have to give the edge to George St Pierre in this fight, simply because he's more rounded, more well-rounded, and George St Pierre actually does have the killer instinct. It's just that I think he's been fighting a lot of tough people that you just can't finish like that. So again, my edge, I'm going to give the edge to George St Pierre, but it's going to be a really, really tough fight. I think George St Pierre, if he's going to win, he's going to win by decision, and I think this is going to be a really, really tough fight for George St Pierre. Alright, before I end my video, as usual, I like to give a scripture, and the scripture I'm going to give this time around is going to be Galatians 6 verse 5. And this is just God telling us to make the most of our lives, in terms of make the most of your talents and the opportunities. Obviously, He wants you to honor and have a relationship with Him, but at the same time, He wants you to make the most of His life in the context of being a blessing to others. So if you're a teacher, be a teacher. If you're an actor, be an actor. If you're a writer, be a writer. If you're an MMA fighter, be an MMA fighter. But whatever you do, make the most of it and be a blessing to other people. Well, that's it. Subscribe, be a friend, leave your comments. Make sure your comments are constructive. I'm sorry for the talking in the background. I have 2 of my younger brothers are staying with me now, so I don't have the place to myself. But hey, that's real life for you. Take care. See you later. Peace.